The purpose of today's presentation is to give you all some tools that you could use at home in terms of maintaining some level of strength. Again, the purpose is for minimal equipment. So if you do have dumbbells, a squat rack, any sort of other implements, that's great. That's all great. If you have any questions around that, we could talk about it. But this is purely based around if you literally have almost nothing. So maybe just a band and your body weight. See here. Oh, okay. Next. All right. So the main purpose of the presentation is to try to connect the why to some of the exercises that we're going to be doing today, and I'm going to show you today. I think there's a lot of home programs out that you could do. You know, a bunch of trainers that are suggesting that these are some of the exercises that you could do at home, which is all great. But from my perspective, working with cycling for a while now, I've developed an understanding of what exercises and how they link into cycling performance. Understanding that, I mean, you know, if we do have minimal equipment at home, we can only do so much, but I still feel that there is value in maintaining this strength over time. And then even if you've never done it before and you're looking to implement it, it's a good opportunity to do that now. And body weight is a great starting point for that. So I'm going to try to connect the why to some of the exercises that I'll show you and demonstrate so that everyone has a better understanding of how these exercises can support you on the bike. Then I'm going to briefly touch upon the importance of movement, technique, and efficiency, and how that all interconnects with just efficiency within the pedal stroke and being on the bike in general. I actually have two handouts that I will be posting for everyone to download. One of them is a exercise movement library. So a bunch of exercises that I've put in there into a nice table so you can reference and go back to, and that links into the home circuit that I've developed for you all to just have a framework to have for working out at home. So this is a track cyclist, but I feel that it still is applicable to just any sort of biking in all honesty. So when we're looking at key areas that we want to develop in a cyclist, we want to make sure that, you know, we're developing good hip flexion and extension. So, you know, being able to bend and then flex the hip and the power that's developed through that. So both double-legged and a single-legged hinging pattern. So we'll go over some of these exercises, some of them that you may have seen or may have not seen. We'll touch upon them. So this video will be posted so you could refer back to it. But again, and then, you know, looking at the knee joint, right? So looking at the quad muscle being an important muscle within the context of cycling. So how could we develop some strength power in that? Well, we think about squat and we think about lunging. So those are some key movements that we always want to think about implementing in our strength program. And then, you know, we're looking at the shoulder, the core, and stability through that, right? So look, you know, because depending on what kind of discipline you are in cycling, it will vary differently. But, you know, if you're doing like some sort of time trials, then, you know, you want to make sure that we're maintaining good aero positioning, and you know, that's supported through some trunk stability work. That's supported through just some exercises such as that target the shoulder area, the pecs, the lats and the back muscles. So again, it's just like, this is not everything. You know, we can also look into, I didn't mention in the presentation, but the calf muscle is another one that's important. I know me, if I go on a very intense ride, if I'm doing some hard intervals on the bike, my calves are just absolutely toasted after it. So there is you could think about doing that kind of stuff as well, on top of some of the things that we'll be going through today. So again, just seeing some key cycling quality, and then how that relates, and what exercise we could use to target that. So we're thinking about pedaling action, we're thinking about downstroke, we're thinking about, you know, good, powerful extension at the knee, at the hip. So we could think about hip bridging, we could think about squatting. On the upstroke, there's like hinging patterns. So on the upstroke, we're thinking about how can we develop those hamstring muscles, for example. Again, we'll be going through all these exercises in further detail throughout the presentation. We're thinking about, you know, right-left pedaling efficiency, right? If we have if one of our legs is more dominant than the other, then that's going to lead to an inefficient pedaling stroke. We're going to develop these dead spots with our pedaling stroke. So how can we try to fix that? Well, we have lunging patterns, right? So the importance of implementing some lunging patterns within our program, you know, arrow positioning. So we have hinging movements, which we go through, plank derivatives, rowing actions. So those will all support developing good postural strength to maintain a good arrow position. And, you know, we can have like core stability, shoulder stability, hip stability. So again, this is just highlighting, and you can always go cross-reference back to this table and look at, okay, you know, if I really want to develop some good shoulder stability, what exercises that can I do? Well, you know, push-up is a good exercise. So I'm doing some plank derivatives, which we'll go through. If you know, if we're thinking about hip stability, if you're on the saddle and your hips are shifting from side to side, well, that's going to lead to an inefficient pedaling stroke, right? So how can we develop hip stability? We have some hip bridging movements. And again, some core stability that goes hand in hand with being able to have an efficient and effective transfer of power from the hip down to the crank. So going back to my previous point of the importance of technique and movement efficiency. So some of the stuff that some of the things that you may have seen on the bike is either the knee caving in while the person's cycling, or the knee going out, right? Both which are not efficient pedaling strategies, right? We want to make sure that our hip, knee, and ankle are aligned, and then that's transferring right into the pedal. Again, we're losing too much energy if we have these inefficient movement patterns. And the same thing, that's why it's important to think about it. How does this relate to what we're trying to do within our strength program? What are we trying to do within our strength program at home? Well, if we're thinking about a squat, if, for example, we're not paying attention to how our squat looks like. So again, we're going back to that previous slide, hip, knee, ankle alignment for a pedaling stroke. Well, if we're thinking about a squat, if that knee is caving in, then we're developing poor movement patterns that will lead to an efficient pedaling stroke. You know, an efficient pedaling stroke, we could really talk about a lot of things, you know, like, you know, a bike setup is a big one, but we won't really discuss that. But a lot of it does come down to just strength, right? If you have poor strength capacity in certain joints, such as your hip, if your hip can't control what your knee is doing, that's going to lead to poor knee control, right? So anytime we're doing any sort of these exercises, especially at home, you know, you film yourself. Like, it's a good opportunity just to see how we are moving, right? And then look at, okay, are these things lining up together? So there's key exercises that I feel every cyclist should have within their program. But again, we will not be able to do everything in the context of a home workout. But there's a lot of things that we can do, starting with a squatting action. So when we're thinking about squatting, we're thinking about good hip, knee, and ankle alignment, which we talked about. We're thinking about being able to push through our whole foot. We're thinking about maintaining good posture in our back, so making sure that chest is proud. So here's a video of me demonstrating a body weight squat, and I'm gonna link all these are done. All these videos are linked in a playlist that are attached to the handout that I'm going to give to you all. So you can always go back to that playlist, look at all the exercises there. But if we're looking at this squat here, right, we're making sure that my hip, knee, and ankle are in line from side to side. We're trying to get at least a parallel positioning, right? We're thinking about how where does that how does that reflect to what we're doing on the bike stroke, right? Our knee angle gets to about 100 degrees. So we want to at least get to those ranges of motion when we're doing these squats, right? If we're only doing half squats, well, that's not really going to help us transfer into whatever we're doing within the pedaling action. right? So again, we don't have a lot of equipment. So what can we use? Well, you know, loaded squat. Here I've taken my laundry detergent and I'm squatting with that. You know, if a body weight squat's too easy, be creative. Be creative. Like take some heavy water jugs, take your laundry detergent or whatever that may be and load it up, right? I've actually put in a couple more videos in the playlist. You can use different bands. If you know a band may cost you know a few bucks, $10, $15, and you can use that to supplement. So you don't really need to go out of your way to buy like any sort of dumbbells or barbells. Next key movement pattern is a lunge. So again, we're thinking about good hip, knee, and ankle alignment. Right now, we're trying to develop strength, more focused on the single leg ability, right? So again, when we're thinking about cycling action, it is a single leg sport, right? Because of the unilateral action. So what my left leg is doing and my right leg happens at different points. So we want to be able to develop good strength symmetry as best as possible. As if, for example, one leg is working harder than the other leg, that stronger leg will start to fatigue, and then that will really have an effect on what's happening on our pedaling stroke. So again, good hip, knee, and ankle alignment. So if you guys want to take a couple of things out of this presentation, think about posture and think about hip, knee, and ankle alignment, because that is the bread and butter in terms of lower body movement efficiency. All right, again, same thing. We want to be pushing through our whole foot. We want to be getting up on our toes. So pushing through our whole foot. Again, chest proud, and we're thinking about going up and down like an elevator. So again, if we were looking at this video, so again, we're going up and down like an elevator. If you look, my hip, knee, and ankle are aligned. I'm going to turn to the side here. All right. So same thing, my knee's underneath my hip, right? If my knee gets a little bit further from my toe, I'm okay with that. It's one of the things where knees over toes leads to knee pain is actually something that's been debunked by research. Moving on, we want to have pushing action. So when we talked about earlier, what does any sort of pushing action have to do with cycling? Well, it develops good shoulder strength. It develops good just general strength in the chest, in the triceps. If we're in a TT position, again, sometimes your triceps might start to fatigue. So again, we want to develop some good movement happens through that. So big thing is we want to have our good body symmetry, so our hip, knee, ankle are in line, but also from head to toe we create a straight line, and we want to lead with our chest towards the floor, right? Sometimes the chin starts to pop forward here, right? And that's poor movement habits that we want to get out of. In this video I've attached a movement regression. So if you have troubles doing a push-up from the ground, we can start to think about how can we modify this exercise for ourselves. And we'll go through a little bit of some of the movement progressions and how you can modify things. But here I've attached a video of a push-up being done with your hands elevated. Takes a little bit of body weight off of you, makes it a little bit easier. Again, so we think about symmetry from head to heel, everything moves in a straight line. And then a pulling motion, right? So big thing with this is we want to make sure that we're squeezing our shoulders back and down and away from ears, right? So we don't want our shoulders start to rising up, right? Because that leads to unnecessary tension through the upper back, right? A lot of cyclists already have a lot of tension through here, so we want to think about how can we start to think about correcting that. Big thing is our shoulder and elbow move together, right? So sometimes what happens is our shoulder starts to pop through from here. We want to make sure that as we're doing a row, everything moves together. Our shoulder and elbow move together. And again, back positioning, back's in a neutral position, so our chin's tucked in, head to hip is a straight line. So here I have a banded version of a hip hinge row. Right, again, you can notice that my shoulder and elbow are moving together. My back's nice and flat. Again, we're not having any sort of distorted movement there. And the last key exercise that we want to think about implementing in our program, and we can do this certainly at home, is a hinging pattern. So what does a hinging pattern look like? Well, it's thinking about having our chest proud and our shoulders back, and we're driving our hips back towards the wall with a slight knee bend in our knees. So here I have a loaded RDL, so a loaded Romanian deadlift. Again, this is it might be a little bit easy, but I've given in the movement progression chart some you could do this with a band. You could do this with two water jugs if you have them, and then start loading that up that way. So throughout the presentation, I talked a little bit about some of the how can we add variety, how can we add some progressions within what we're doing. You know, there's tempo, so slowing down the movement. So for example, if we're thinking about a squat, right? Instead of going up and down, we could slow down the movement, 4 seconds down. Oh, that's a typo, actually, apologize. Or we could add pauses. So we could have a squat and we pause at the bottom position. That creates more time under tension, so that makes it a little bit more difficult. Again, it's just one way of adding variety, adding some level of change or progression without implementing a load. But we can use a load. If we have dumbbells or we can have bands, we can use household items, could be as a load. Again, I've added some suggestions there. We could put a water jug, a laundry detergent, or anything really. You could go to your garage and you could use paint cans. I don't know. You could. This is an opportunity just to remain creative and use the items in your house to use as load. You could limit points of contact. So, for example, if we're doing a plank position, you know, we can lift up one leg from there. And we can hold that position. We can alternate legs, right? So we're limiting the points of contact. So in a planking position, so we have 4 points of contact. If we lift up one leg, then we only have 3 points of contact. So that's adds a layer of instability, right? So if you're really trying to focus on some good core stability, think about how can we modify it so that we increase the stability demand. So again, we could do that with a push-up. We could lift our leg with a push-up and start doing push-ups with one leg lifted. Again, I'm just giving you some tools, some ideas that you could implement in your program so that you could have a little bit more variety with gyms being closed and with limited equipment. Again, use elevation, right? So I showed in the previous slide of a push-up being down with your hands elevated. We can make things harder by elevating our feet. So we're going to have to use push more of our body weight. Again, or we could do this with a plank position, right? So if we've got tired, okay, we have, you know, we plank for like a minute or two on the ground. How can we make this harder? Well, just elevate your feet, for example. Again, using some of these varieties, some of these progressions will help help move the program along for you guys. Before we get to any questions, I'm just going to go through and share let's see here, the workouts and movement library that I've created. So just give me a second here. Stop share. Okay. Sorry, Mike, do I just put the file in the chat?
Yeah, you can try doing it that way. Otherwise, if you send it my way, I'll make sure it gets posted on our webinar page.
Okay, let's do it through the chat, and then I mean I'll go through it anyways. Okay, so doesn't seem like I could do that.
If you want, just email it to me and I'll put it
Yeah.
up.
Okay. Let's do that. Sorry about that. Okay. So if we go to share screen. Okay. Sure. Huh. Sure. Okay, so thought I would be able to post it in the chat, but this will get sent out and put onto the website. So look at that shortly. But essentially, this is a movement library that I've created for everyone. Disclaimer here: it is just to serve as a guideline, and it's to be completed with little to no equipment. It's not an extensive list of all the exercises, so there's a lot more exercises that you do for as a cyclist. However, it still gives everyone a good starting point with that. And again, use your best judgment with technique and select appropriate exercise variations and progressions. So in this handout, I've created a movement library playlist. So if you go to the link and just click on it, it'll take you to all the exercises that at least most of the exercises that I listed here. I didn't include like push-ups, but for some of the progressions I've included some of these exercises here. Again, you look at the exercise pattern. So we talked about a squat, a lunge, a hinge, a push, a pull. And then we didn't talk about this for time, but this is when we're thinking about core, we're thinking about developing the core in the front, on the side, in the back, and then being able to resist rotationally as well. And I'll give everyone some exercise variations through that. So when we look at, I've included some notes here, some key coaching points that we want to make sure that we are doing. So for example, in a squat, feet shoulder width outside of shoulder, knees in line with hips and feet, chest proud, sink hips between knees. So just some simple movement strategies that you could think about when you're doing these exercises. And then I've created for some of these exercises progressions. So level 0 would be your starting point. And if you want it to make it a little bit more difficult, you could do it as a loaded squat as an example. So these are just examples. Again, there's different ways to skin a cat essentially. And then a lunging pattern. So what muscles are we trying to target? Then we could have progressions of that as well. Hinging pattern. A push up. So if we could start out with a push up on the ground. If that's too difficult, we get hands elevated push up, or if that's too easy, we could do a +1. I called it. We have our feet elevated. And again, I've provided some movement progression. So start at my suggestion is to start at level 0, and then work your way up to a level +1. Or if you're having difficulties with that, go back to level -1. Okay, and then just use that as a movement progression list. And I've also created for everyone a minimal equipment cyclist home workout circuit. So with this, you could do this either for reps or for time. I've created and I've given everyone some guidelines on how to go about that. It is a circuit, so essentially you're going to be able, essentially you'll go through all these exercises from top to bottom, and depends on how you're feeling that day. You might just do 2 sets of that. You might do 3 sets of that. You might 4 sets of that. Like I said, you can either do it for the amount of prescribed reps, or you could do it for time and see how many reps you could do in that allotted time. Again, big thing with this is you could always go back to, if you want to vary this circuit up, go back to the movement library, cross-reference the exercise pattern. So you know, if we're looking at a lunge here, I've given an example as a split squat, but if you want to change things up, you could go back to the lunge here. Okay, oh, maybe I want to do step ups instead today. So then you could just plug and play, and then you can have, by doing that, you still maintain a full body workout that's using exercises that will help you support you on the bike. Another thing I didn't mention here is you could use a towel for any sort of rowing exercises, even if you do not have a band at your disposal. I've included some videos where I'm demonstrating with using a partner and a towel. So again, I'm just giving everyone some tools that they can use. And again, there's like I said, many ways to go about this, but at least it gives everyone an idea, a framework, like I say, to go about this. Big disclaimer is, do not go do any of these movements with pain. You know, it's either you change up the exercise or you modify it, or you don't do that exercise at all. Biggest thing is if there's pain, don't do it. So that's my biggest suggestion. And again, when you're doing, before you start even doing this circuit, go through a warm-up. So that's either on a bike and do some stretching, whatever you feel is appropriate for yourself. But again, we want to, like you're going into a race for a competition, we want to get an adequate warm-up, so raising the heart rate and doing some stretching, mobility stuff, and then going into our circuit. So that leads me to the end of my presentation based on this. If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them. The biggest thing with all of this, it is just giving everyone some tools and some ideas on what you could do while you're at home, and how you could implement some of these exercises into a circuit. Again, it's just one way of going about it. So yeah, if you have any questions, just feel free to write them in the chat. I'm going to send Mike the PDFs, and he's going to post them on the website so that you guys could all have access to that.
Great. So thanks, Greg, for taking the time to do that. If anyone has any questions, as mentioned, you can just type them into the chat box on the right-hand side. Basically, you just scroll down and you should have some options that appear, speech bubble. So if there's any other questions, we'll give you one final 30 seconds for anyone who wants to get a question in. Otherwise, this webinar will be, the video of this webinar, as well as the information will be posted on that webinar page on the front part of our website. And you'll see that Greg actually has another session coming up in 2 weeks for part 2 of this series. So I think we have a question down there. Greg, can you see it?
How often would you say that strength training should be done per week? I think twice a week is more than enough. If you're just starting, I would even suggest just going once a week and then developing some developing the ability to do that once a week, and then moving on to twice a week. But I think twice a week is more than plenty for people, and you could modify it. Maybe one day you do 4 sets, the next day you do 2 sets, and just play around with that. But twice a week for strength training, I think is plenty. And if you're in a road racing season, for example, then just using it as a once a week maintenance is good as well. So.
Great. Doesn't look like we have any other questions at this time. So special thanks to Greg for taking the time to do this. Hopefully that you guys are all getting benefit from this, and we'll continue to run these.
Sorry, Mike, there's another question.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah. So considering the uncertainty of the cycling season and the availability of time, since we're all at home, what should be the schedule? This is not as cut and dry, I would say, but given that there's definitely the uncertainty of races coming up, so I think this is a great opportunity to implement some sort of strength training. Just because if you're new to strength training, there might be some soreness that might be caused from it, which might affect your performance on the bike. But if we're weeks on weeks away from any sort of significant races, then yeah, you could definitely do this like twice a week. I don't see an issue for that. My biggest thing with a schedule and strength training is looking at what essentially you're doing on the bike, and then how does that strength training session might affect with that. So for example, if we're doing a strength training session on the Monday, and we know that it will cause some soreness, and then we have interval work, some VO2 intervals on the Tuesday, that's going to affect what kind of power you're going to be pulling out on that Tuesday, right? However, if you're doing like a zone 2 ride, for example, on the Tuesday, you don't necessarily, some muscle soreness won't necessarily affect you as much. So it really depends. Like my suggestion is look at the session. That if it's an intense session on the bike, then and that's a priority, then I would do that first, and then look at doing the strength training session second. But with any sort of strength training sessions, we want to make sure that we also have adequate time between them. So, at least 20 to 48 hours in between any sessions. So if we're going to do a strength training session on the Tuesday, waiting until Thursday to do our second session. So that's probably where we stand on that. Second question, do we strength train before a cardio workout or after? So there is a lot of discussion. So this if anyone's interested, looking to concurrent training, so training strength training and doing aerobic training, endurance training simultaneously. Rule of thumb is looking at it from the perspective of, first and foremost, what is most important. So if your bike workout is important for that day and it is an intense workout, then I would say do that first. However, generally speaking, I would say do strength first and then your cardio workout second. Ideally, in an ideal world, you do it on separate days, but if you're going to do it on the same day, then I would suggest waiting 6 hours. So you could do your strength training session in the morning, and then, for example, you wake up, do your 7 o'clock strength training session, and then waiting till maybe like 2-3 o'clock in the afternoon to do your cardio workout, or however you want to structure it. But that's probably the rule of thumb is 6 hours, or ideally done on separate days. Would you still say only twice a week for body weight strength? I think twice a week is probably more than enough. I don't see why you need to do 3 times a week. If you're a sprint track cyclist, then strength and power is highly important. But from my experience working with endurance athletes, twice a week is more than enough, and you could fluctuate with that between twice and once a week. My biggest thing with training sessions is to maintain some sort of continuity. So not starting and stopping every few weeks, but even if it is a maintenance session, like once a week, if you're doing like heavy volume on the bike, once a week, I think will allow you to maintain that strength. So yeah. There's much debate about cadence and round pedal. What is your perspective of this? There is a lot of debate on that. I think it just goes down. It depends. I think there's a lot of factors that go into cadence and developing round pedal. Do you mean like the peanut shape, developing like working through the dead spot, like peanut shape versus a sausage shape for pull and push? Okay. Yeah, so I don't necessarily know too much. If I'm being completely honest, I haven't really looked into too much of this. I know for example, if the cadence is too high, then that will affect the firing of your muscles. So that will, I think I believe you're over 140 RPMs, that will affect the round pedal. But again, I don't really have an opinion, to be honest, and I don't think I'll do justice in answering it, to be honest. So I'm gonna have to defer. Sorry about that. I think we're good, Mike.
Yeah, it looks like that's it for questions. As mentioned, we will post the video for this, hopefully, as long as it recorded correctly, as well as Greg's materials on the front page of our website, under the webinar series section. As well, we'll keep thinking about your questions, and Greg will have another webinar scheduled. It's posted there as well. I believe it's in about 2 weeks' time, as well as the other webinars that we have planned. So thanks for everyone for attending, and hopefully.
Sorry, Mike, really quickly, did you it would be, if anyone has, if you want to put in the comments right now suggestions around a webinar, like questions that you maybe are curious about or you want answered, then please type them out. Any sort of feedback helps me with creating content for the viewers. So, or if you want to email Mike directly, then that will help as well.
Great. So we'll leave the chat and room open for a bit for people to type in any suggestions. I'll let Greg log off if he wants to, and we'll be able to connect at the next webinar. Reminder for anyone interested, we do have a yoga session today. I believe it's at 4 o'clock. That will be live streamed as well. So thanks again to everyone. Stay healthy, stay safe, and we'll connect soon.
All right, thanks guys.